Tony's the nearest thing that Pro Audio's got to a proper rock star. He's recognisable around the world. He has worked in the industry for several decades. There are historical episodes like the first ever Glastonbury, the first ever systems for Pink Floyd, when Turbo Sound, the company that Tony started. I'm sure you all know the history, and you will be aware, I know, of the extraordinary leaps and bounds that live sound took, especially during the 80s and the early 90s, when anyone that was a regular gig goer will remember that all of a sudden, it seemed in a few short years, we went from a sound that was loud but fun, tolerable, to a sound when it was amazing, the precision and the accuracy of the systems that we suddenly had. Remember the late 80s, early 90s period, especially those flagship Floyd shows. And it seemed that several problems were being solved in a very clever way. They were great years, and here we are in 2013, and there's been a lot of changes since then. And mostly to do with the way audio is delivered, not just live, but also in the home, and the way the record industry is delivering audio now to iPods and so on. I'll give you a very good example, which I hope sets us off in the right direction to talk about timing. I have two stepdaughters who are very keen on music. The oldest one is 18, and if you ask her to find a song that's caught your attention, she'll do it for you in about 5 minutes. And you ask her whether any money changed hands, she'll laugh. She just doesn't understand the concept of spending money to buy music. Her younger sister is 14, and she'll happily play you a new track she's heard, very enthusiastically, on her phone. I'm sure you've all got kids who do this to you. Listen to this new song by X, Y, Z. And the listening experience, she says, oh, it's really good quality. But actually what you're listening to is an incredibly narrow, thin bandwidth of audio, which is a bit like stabbing yourself in the ear with a chopstick. It's horrible. You all know that, because I'm sure you know young people who do this to you. And you think, oh, well, I remember consuming music and exploring music with the best sound system I could have in the home. And the audio quality was very much part of the whole experience of knowing music. Well, that attitude, we fear, is creeping into society as a whole. It really doesn't matter how the audio is delivered, the quality of it. And it could be that the industry is losing sight of some fundamentals. My two daughters, they love live music, they like going to shows. And we hope that today we can perhaps explore some of the issues affecting sound reinforcement for live shows. What systems can do to get somewhere near what we really require, and certainly what they do to get nowhere near it, because they often do. So, I'm going to talk to Tony about some of the basic issues of sound quality, but we'll start by talking about topics that I know Tony has touched on in the past, which we'd like to explore further today. Not long ago, Tony wrote a paper for the Institute of Acoustics, and it was entitled Reality or Soft Focus. I'm sure that as this discussion progresses, we'll find out exactly what we meant there by soft focus. You'll have your own ideas of what soft focus is in photographic terms. The visual analogies are really helpful in this, because audio is invisible, it's intangible, it's hard to know what we're talking about a lot of the time. But if you put it in pictorial terms, which we'll try to do today a couple of times, it'll become immediately obvious what's happening when we're talking about poor quality audio. But let's start by talking about a few of the basic points, Tony. You've said that transient response is perhaps even more crucial than frequency response in a system. Can you explain the difference between what transient response is and what frequency response is? Why transient is important? What are they?
Okay. Phil, can I start by just saying thanks to you all for Come in, nice to see you. What do I mean by transient response? Well, it's the ability of a system to follow faithfully the beginning of any sound. If you take a violin sound or a guitar sound and you remove the beginning, it's actually quite hard to tell the difference. In other words, all the action, excitement is in the initial, in the beginning of the sound.
A few microseconds.
Yeah, well, I mean, take a snare, goes from nothing to full on in an incredibly short space of time. So that should be crisp and precise. Horn stabs, anything of that nature. Just speaking, the word T needs good transient transmission to be intelligible. So transient response is the ability of a chain of audio components, particularly the loudspeakers, but just anywhere, to actually jump fast enough. As you can see from the picture behind, our awareness of time is actually staggeringly high. What are we talking about here? Yeah, 0.018 milliseconds, or about 18
microseconds.
18 microseconds.
And that's the difference between the sound arriving at one ear and the next of the vector. So
Yeah.
you can sense a change in location of an audio
Yeah,
source quickly.
This is actually from Dr. Peter Lennox at Derby University, and they did some experiments to see just how much difference you could, how small a change in location was detectable by a blindfolded person, and it turns out to be 1 or 2 degrees, which is very, very fine. So if we get vector location from the difference in arrival time between the 2 ears, then that translates to that amount of time.
That's a small difference.
There may be more to it than just that, but it's a good starting point.
Right. And if you contrast that with movie frames, for example, which is another one we've discussed.
Okay.
If you were to put that into visual terms, you would quickly see literally the differences between one frame and the next. So the movie would start to look like a series of jumps rather than a smooth film.
Yeah. As long as you can move the visual sense at 28 frames per second, it appears like a continuum. I guess once you get down to 15 frames per second, you're starting to see the jerks. Well, to get a continuum in audio, you have to be a little slower than probably 15 microseconds, which is an incredibly small amount of time. Shall I expand?
Yeah, please do.
Thinking on about why have we got such acute time resolution in our hearing. So I go back to the plains of Africa and think about the fact that half the time it's dark and maybe half the time it's light, you're in the jungle. So you can't actually see a great deal apart from the foliage. So I think hearing has evolved to be incredibly refined in being able to know if you hear something, you instantly know from what direction it's come, because it's a matter of survival.
So human hearing is far more critical to basic evolutionary needs than sight.
It's probably much more critical to our survival than sight. The resolution difference there is the hearing's about 2,000 times more higher resolution than the visual sense.
Okay. We do have that photo. We're going to talk about. Let's leave that a bit later. Though. It's a lovely photo of Star Trek, which I can't wait to show you. It does illustrate resolution in terms of pictures, and then we can use that as an analogy for audio. But before we do that, I did want to ask you. It's probably quite clear to most people here today that we could very quickly get into just an argument about digital against analogue in terms of sound systems, couldn't we? Because we know that digital chops up the signal into binary elements and therefore creates gaps between them. which we can all probably agree that we're going to notice those fairly quickly if we're not careful. But is there more to it than that? Is there also a way in which certain, just analogue systems, have to work hard to keep up with, for example, transient response, but also solve this problem at the time?
Well, I suppose in the late 80s, analogue reached its peak, and in many respects, the average digital situation still hasn't matched that. At the thing, okay, we still have a debate. 25 years into digital, there is still a debate, and there are people who will not go near digital. And this is 25 years after its introduction, and the debate goes on. And if it was that good, why is this still the case? I mean, we're talking a generation. It would have all died out by now, but the fact is it hasn't. And the thing, in a nutshell, analog, despite its shortcomings, noise floor, maybe doesn't quite stretch out to the highest or lowest frequencies. It is always in time. It's always correct. And digital is actually far more complicated, and there are many more things to get correct. Any one of which you don't get correct is gonna bring it down. And there's many times I've been listening to, pretty substandard digital stuff, which is actually the norm, and I'm thinking, I really don't like this, but I can't, it doesn't seem to be so distorted. Doesn't, all the frequencies appear to be there, and yet it's most unpleasant. What is this about? And I think it's quite a lot to do with time smearing. If we're that sensitive to time, and digital processing introduces latency,
yeah,
and unless everything's lined up to ground zero, the ear is going to pick up that there are very
there's other
small
parts of the system, rather than like clock.
Yeah, we can
Okay.
we'll get to that.
Yeah.
The mind picks up that there are micro time delays involved, and actually disengages. It's not so interesting. It's not so exciting. It loses its life. And of course, as Phil's mentioned, there are other things. You have to get the maths really, really good, because if the maths isn't perfect, every time you do an iteration, the errors just keep on increasing. You have to. The clocks are really important, because jitter. Apparently, there is no such thing as a jitter-free clock. It's just that some are less jittery than others. And there are tales in the business of people using alternative clocks on various well-known bits of equipment, and suddenly they actually sound half decent. So it is quite complicated. Not to mention the converters.
Yeah.
Your digital to analog converters are very important, and at the end of it all, you need somebody who actually understands the difference between good audio and not good audio. If you, my experience in 45 years now is that if you do everything by known theory and the maths, you don't necessarily finish up making a good piece of audio. There has to be a human involved who actually knows how to listen, and as, if you like, train their hearing. We've all got good hearing. It's just a matter of how much attention you can pay to it and how practiced you are at doing it.
Absolutely. I should encourage anyone to, as we talk, to fire a question in. We could do the standard procedure of us talking and then having a Q&A session at the end, but please.
Yeah, if I've said something that's not...
Put your hand up at any point, please. One of us is bound to say something highly controversial at one point, and I'd love it to...
You mentioned about analog and digital. Has analog got the soul?
Has analog got soul?
Yeah.
That's a fairly esoteric question, which I don't mind at all. I don't know about that, but what I do know is that if you get digital right, it's absolutely as good, if not better, than the best analog. But it is a matter of getting it right. In other words, you've got to be choosing the right sound cards. There's some very well-known equipment out there that was completely destroyed by the quality of the sound card. I do believe that they pulled their socks up recently, but the thing is, it's been. I mean, we're all aware that audio is a chain of events, and my analogy to that is it's a series of windows. Say you've got a dozen windows. If they're all clean, you can see through to the view, or even the light perhaps. But you only need one of those windows to be dirty, and that's it. You're starting to lose things. So actually, really good audio is very rare, in fact, because it's all in favour of the default condition. Everything has to be right for it to be good. You only need one somewhere in the chain, not very good, and that's it. You're down to that level. So it's only as good as the weakest link, which is quite an old saying these days.
Can we use that picture?
Yeah, sure we can. This is actually one I used for showing to try and illustrate the difference between MP3s and a reasonable quality WAV file. And you can still sort of see what it is, but...
So that's the MP3 and that's the album,
Yeah.
that's the vinyl album.
Could be the vinyl album or, say, a 9624 digital,
Okay.
if you can find one. You can find plenty of CD quality.
Right.
Which, if you get everything else good enough, you begin to hear the aliasing. You know, there's an edginess to it, that CD quality. So it's, you know, we reckon that's not quite good enough to pay proper respect to.
Now, CD quality is a compromise in itself, isn't it?
Yeah, not a bad one considering how long ago it was. But
yeah.
I think if you want to get up to analog levels of richness and you know, all the harmonics and everything, it probably needs to be at least 96.
Yeah, I mean it's 44.1, isn't it? Just so.
Yeah, it's 44.
It's clear. So it's less than half of what you're recommending.
44.1 in time,
Yeah.
16-bit depth in dynamic range.
So there's all kinds of things in the way then if your system is going to be highly dependent on DSP, which they obviously are today. There's all kinds of things that are getting in the way of the basic process of reproducing an audio signal. Just turning our attention to loudspeakers for a moment, you talked about the difference between slow loudspeakers and fast loudspeakers. I'm guessing this is in connection with transients, about the ability of the system to pick up.
Yes. Yeah.
What's before it? What it was before the microphone. So could you explain to us, you know, what a loudspeaker has to do, in broad terms, to be fast or slow?
Yes. Okay. Well, remind me, there's a whole load of stuff in that. Maybe I could come at it a bit sideways and say, when John and I were first developing the TMS-3, which was, if you like, our first foray into cone mid-range, horn-loaded cone mid-range, which actually we went for because, you know, at the time it was 4-inch diaphragm, 2-inch exit compression drivers were doing pretty well everything from about 500 hertz, 800 hertz upwards, and of course they're quite delicate little devices, and distortion levels were just outrageous, and actually still are, funnily enough. So we thought, well, we just got to push them into the high frequency region, you know, 4.5, 5.5K up, and maybe they got half a chance of sounding okay. So we did develop a horn-loaded cone mid-range, and when we were tuning the first TMS-3, and this was probably back in 1980, we were listening to an Earth, Wind and Fire track, which has got finger snaps on it,
Does anyone know what that track is? Because I thought it was got to get you into my life, but Tony thought it was a little. Earth, Wind and Fire, just it starts with.
It starts with about.
Quiz, come on. Does anyone know that track?
Anyway.
September?
We need a definitive answer here. Where's Ken Bruce?
Anyway, the thing was, it had some very nicely recorded finger snaps, and we didn't realise at the time that we were focused on the transient information in the finger snaps, and when that really felt like it was alive and real, that's where we sat. That's where we sat our tuning. So for a loudspeaker to do good transient, yeah, it needs to be quick. And typically transients are focused in the high frequency area, which involves compression drivers, and they have to move at least 18,000 times a second to be any good. So they are quite light and delicate devices. Really have no business doing mid-range, which is still the case. I mean, people talk about new technology, but to be honest, it hasn't really moved on much since the 60s. We had compression drivers then. We still have the same kinds of phase plug arrangements. Maybe, okay, there was a change from aluminium to titanium, which is a bit tougher, doesn't corrode as fast, and maybe some of the voice coil materials are a bit more heat.
They've got lighting as well, I think. That appeals to the captains.
Lighter.
And weight, the design of the system.
Since the advent of neodymium,
Yeah.
Magnets have got lighter, but sadly they're not big enough percentage of the whole thing to make a huge difference. They do help, but basically the technology's not. Actually, the technology hasn't changed a lot since the 30s. Hate to say this, because everybody's always boasting about how they move forward and all the rest of it, but the truth is we still use the compression drive. The first moving coil loudspeaker was patented by Kellogg in, I think, 1928. We're still using moving coil loudspeakers, and the compression driver came in the early 30s. And the phase plug design for that is pretty well what everybody does to this day.
Okay, we are talking about point source here, but there's another technology that's come along, which I know is one of your favourites.
Just talking about componentry.
Okay, but we're talking about the timing issue and how quick one unit has to be to do its transits. What happens when?
Okay, all right. So if we take like studio near field monitors, you're actually trying to get some bass out of these things, which is only this big, which is actually a pretty ridiculous thing to be trying to do in the first place. The only way you can do it is to actually have quite a long coil on the loudspeaker. This means that it's going to be pretty slow and sluggish. So unless you put your mid-range into the tweeter, which is already a bad idea, it's going to be pretty slow, and it's not going to give you all the information. There's another picture here actually that might do that. It's this one. So the blue one's a fast speaker, which has just been given something like a snare hit. That would be the classic. And a slow speaker the red one, is what happens. And actually, what you also see from that is that by the time the slow speaker has got to its peak, kind of slow transient, the actual signal is already on the way back down. So it's not telling you the truth in any way at all.
And that's more of an issue for low frequency generators.
Yeah. If you try to make a small speaker do bass, that's what the kind of device you finish up with. So we took the view with our range of small speakers that we weren't, as long as you get the implication and the definition of bass, we weren't bothered if it did 60, 70 hertz. It was fine if it did 100, as long as it did all the rest of it really well. You can always add a subwoofer and do the job properly.
I was sort of edging towards the issue of multiple arrays, which is, I would guess, a way that would exacerbate the time problem, because surely you've got a whole lot more curves like this going on at the same time. What effect do multiple rays, how do they exacerbate the time problem?
Well, I mean, that's one way of messing up your transient, or actually just not having it. Maybe step back a bit.
Yeah.
So with light, it's quite easy. You can get everything you need out of one light bulb, because we only have one octave to deal with. That's the rainbow. Whereas in audio, actually, there's 10. And so the engineering requirements that to do with low frequencies are, say, orders of magnitude different from the high frequencies. So you have to some extent, split it into bands. I mean, there are small speakers that kind of do a mid-range job of both, both extremes. But typically, you're going to have a tweeter and a woofer, and a bit more advanced, you're going to break it up into a woofer, a mid-range, and a tweeter, and more advanced still, it would be bass, low mid, high mid, and treble. And this is pretty well how it is. Well, as soon as you divided the spectrum into bands, you can't. And of course, unless you pull the stunt that Tannoy did, which was to have it all emanating from one source, which was a nice move, yeah. But typically, they have to occupy different places in space. So it's if you're dead on axis, you can usually make a good job of it. As soon as you start to move off axis, if they're all stacked up in a line like this, if you go vertically, you will, at crossover point, you're going to be getting time smearing and cone filtering. Doing it well, you can mitigate these things, but that is a fundamental thing.
What do the systems do to compensate for that?
What do they do to compensate?
Yeah.
Well, you can increase your crossover slope rate, but once you get into 48 dB per octave, it don't always sound good. It can start to sound a bit weird, and that's where you need a human being to go, well, the weirdness of the 48 dB crossover, is it better or worse than the slight weirdness I'm getting at crossover point between these two? It's those they're the kind of engineering trade-offs that only a human can do, and computers, they can only do what they're programmed to do. So, go back to the original question, please, Phil. What was it?
I was trying to edge towards trying to build a picture of the ways in which modern audio systems generally
So we've talked about
don't really tackle the fundamental issue, and then have all these other ways of compensating for it further down the line.
Yeah, well, actually, once you've messed up transient, there's no getting it back. That's for sure. Let's see if I've got this picture of the line, cross section of the line.
Yeah, there you go.
And excuse me. What do they do to compensate for it? Well, it's very hard to, because depending upon what frequency you're at, frequency is dimension. So in some places, a line array, they'll be adding up constructively, and other places, they won't be adding up at all, because the dimension is big enough. So we need another point here. Relating frequency to dimension, if your horn mouth or even your cone is bigger than a half wavelength of the frequency that you've got in mind, it's going to contain it, and it will. This is why a typical 8 or 10-inch loudspeaker, as you go up in frequency, the directivity narrows, because the dimension of the frequency is contained by the cone itself, and at high frequency, you've got no trouble at all, completely contained. So they typically will narrow as you go up in frequency. So at certain areas of the mid-range of a stack of speakers, the high frequencies will not be seeing each other. They'll just all be coming out, and if you can get them organised nicely, they might even collaborate further out in the field. If you've got things that are starting to diffract because their dimension is bigger than either the horn mouth or the size of the driver, then they're going to start diffracting. So you could be say standing here and hearing maybe 3 or 4 speakers at, I don't know, say 800 hertz all at once, but they'll all be arriving at slightly different times. There'll be like a cascade, almost like a palisade fence of arrivals, and this the brain registers, goes, that's a bit strange. So typically sound arriving from a distance has 2 things have occurred with it. The high frequency will have dropped off, which is where a lot of the transient information is, and it will have bounced off things, i.e. secondary arrivals. We've been living with that for so long that the brain automatically understands that it's...
That makes you think it's far away.
That it's come from a distance. Proximity is good high frequency and minimal amount of secondaries. So if you've got secondaries in your system before it even starts, because I've been wondering why do line arrays always sound like they're over there? Because one of our main objectives at Function 1 is to get the sound out of the box and engaged with the person. In other words, I want a really big 3D kaleidoscopic soundstage. Otherwise, I don't think I'm doing what I set out to do. And when the sound is over there, so I'm thinking, why do they always sound like this? Well, this is my reasoning. Is that you're not actually getting a singularity at all. In other words, your transient is not even delivered in the first place, but even if it is delivered, you're getting it 2 or 3, 4, 5, 6 times, and the brain registers that as a signal of, well, that's way over there, and that's where I'm going to put it in my personal perception.
Does the brain also make sort of see through the devices that are used to compensate for these time differences? They're not the DSP sort of approach, which is always trying to make amends for multiple array. Do you think that actually that they haven't got past that perception, human perception yet, that it can still work out?
Well, it's a bit like you can make a delay line, but you can't make an advancer. Can't get sound to arrive before it actually happened.
No.
And if your original information is not there, it can't do anything with that. DSP is just it just deals with EQ and actually time. Because back to the thing about we've got all these multiple components. So what you can do with the DSP is you can get your high frequencies to line up with your mids and that group to line up with your woofers. But you can't restore transient, and you can't really take away all the secondaries. So actually, it's incapable of being fixed by DSP. I know there's a lot of faith in it these days. I think people have actually stopped designing loudspeakers, and now they're all playing with DSP and telling everybody how marvellous it is.
Yeah, but you have said that the systems are very good at masking what isn't, what it's missed.
Okay, so 2 things have happened really. The beginning of the digital age was also concurrent with the arrival of line array, and I do remember at the beginning the first VDOS, and it wasn't bad. And I remember people saying, yeah, but you can't use another one next to it, you've got to be at least 18 foot away. This is what they were saying about them in the 90s. And why we like them is because you can walk around it and you don't get too much difference in sound. Which is not strictly true, of course, but these days you see you see line arrays up and another one next to it, or, you know, I mean, the whole basis that Christian Hall had in the first place is actually, you know, that's gone. They're just there. I mean, I think they're there because they actually go in and out of the truck and fly very, very quickly. Time is money, etc. It's a very compartmentalised thinking world today. You know, here's the band, here's the line array, here's the video screen. You know, it all fits quite nicely. And to hell with the sound quality.
Would you go as far as to say that engineers are actually not hearing some of the fundamental problems that
I would.
exist?
I would absolutely, because get back to where we were a second ago. So line arrays and digital arrive on planet Earth at the same time. Line arrays smear things. Digital doesn't make a very good job, averagely. So how can you tell which is actually causing the problem? There's also the fact that what you live with programs you. You know, I mean, humans should, well, it's advisable to apply discernment about what you let into yourself. Food, drugs, whatever. But if you're living with, say, a system that's not particularly good, live with it long enough and your brain will EQ it to flat. And after a while that becomes fixed. So if you've programmed yourself to find a bad sound okay, when you're faced with a good sound, you will actually not like it because it's so different. And this is a bit of a problem and actually a bit of a terrifying one-way street, which I feel the audio business is not just walking down, it's actually falling down it these days.
But does it actually mean that engineers are not going back to manufacturers and suppliers and sort of with that critical awareness of deficiencies in certain signal processing systems because they've been got used to this compromise?
I think they've just all got used to it. You know, most of the digital desks, some of them I would consider absolutely unusable. I mean, that's not audio, that's just a mess. I mean, I can name names, but it's probably a bit gauche to do so.
It depends if they're in the audience or not. If there's nobody here from, you know,
But
speaking mind. Actually, no, the other way around. If there is somebody here from speaking mind.
let's just say that as far as mixing desks go, a Midas XL4 is still the yardstick.
Other analogue speakers that mix it up. Okay, great stuff.
So, sorry.
Yes, please.
Just obviously the XL4 you referenced, the peak of analogue, working on the smaller scale. Would you rather have a very cheap analog desk, or perhaps a mid-range digital? I know I'm talking very, very generically here, but for most people just listening, you know, perhaps the issues of things like noise floor and some of the issues with analog at the lower end of the market, compare it just a quick listen to a reasonable mid-range digital, and it's like, wow, this something in you goes, that sounds a lot better. Is it maybe it's cleaner? People say things, it's cleaner, it's sharper, it's this, it's that. And so I mean, obviously, if we're talking at the peak of everything, give me an XL4 any day. But when everything steps down, is there a place for mid-range digital as opposed to cheap stroke crap analog?
We really like using the Midas Venice. Fantastic desk, and that's, I don't know if you describe it as cheap, but it's certainly inexpensive. Yeah. And I'd rather have that than just about any digital desk you could mention. So, actually, yes, reasonable analog will definitely have less issues than most digital.
Are you talking about
opinion?
Budget?
It was just, I think that speaking about real world and engineers obviously getting, you know, learning to, you know, compromise on and then you were talking about your kids with the iPhone thinking this sounds great, you know, it's a societal issue as much as anything else, but and obviously when you're a small company like the one that I run and you are trying to do the best you can at the point in the market you're at, and you're making those very real decisions where like perhaps one sound desk is your annual spend, and it's just then what factors you take into account when, as you quite rightly point out, everyone is saying, go digital, you can get all this amazing stuff built into and it's then when you're making those critical budget decisions that are, when you don't have, you can't take an XL4 into a small church hall.
No.
Kind of idea. So it's
Well, I
vague,
mentioned the Venice.
but yeah, exactly. That's the thing. So you take your Venice. It was just sort of getting into, you know.
Do you feel a pressure to go digital because it's digital? There's a range of cost desks available now.
I run a rental house,
Down to
so
this big.
I feel pressure to stock what people will rent from me at the most
And that comes from
cost-effective
your
point.
customers.
Yeah, so pressure from
Exactly.
customers, but also, you know, trying to make a return. So the very crude example, you know, the analogue desk with the racks of outboard and all that kind of stuff versus a compact laptop, I don't know, LS916 or something, you know.
With plugins in it.
Well, not just with everything built in, etc., etc. And this is where money gets in the way as well. But you know, people want to take the nice little compact, everything in one place, off you go, reduce prep time, reduce freight, blah 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 blah. And so this isn't to sort of counter the arguments. What I'm trying to get more to is the point where the issues you're raising. How do we translate that into the real world situation that the majority of us find ourselves in? Desperately aspiring to this excellence, and you know, where do the compromises come? Because they do come.
I certainly would like to move it on to looking at, rather than just sitting here complaining that it's all gone wrong. I would like to move it, Tony and I will do so, to a discussion of what we can do as an industry to perhaps take a few steps in another direction. And also, thank you, to make it perhaps a bit broader in terms of what's happening in society. But I think we do now understand what Tony meant by soft focus, smoothing out the blemishes that are in the system because it hasn't grasped the original signal in the right way, using DSP, perhaps line array. We understand that sort of that definition. So I wanted to talk about why that's happening and what pressures on the industry have existed from the early days and more recently. Is it all just about convenience? Is it because the convenience of operation, push button, using presets, these are so important now to sort of getting the game, getting it done and getting out to the next one? Is that the pressure that's come down on the industry that have allowed these habits to form?
Yeah, well, I mean, just getting back to the wonderful old XL4, it is big, and actually that translates to maybe, half a dozen seats because it's bigger.
Well, there's the financial aspect.
Yeah, so there's that, and we've had that experience. Oh no, we want to use one of these because its footprint's so small. Some of the older guys like myself actually need somebody else to push the buttons and move the things around. I'm sure I could learn it, but you know how much time you got in life, etc. You can just reach for a knob. It's great, and it's a different way of. It's almost a different way of mixing. It's far more immediate and tactile. When you're going through menus, it's not the same. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's not the same. So there's that. There's the fact that the cost of touring it just keeps going up. With fuel, everything from fuel. What used to be a 3-man tour is now a 2-man tour with using local crew, and you get there. So anything that's on dollies and separated into 4 pieces and can wheel in. So there is an advantage with line arrays in that regard, is that they're a lot easier to set up.
I mean, it sounds fantastic, doesn't it? To have
faster.
To have a map, to use the Maya software side, but to be able to take a reading of the space, log that. I mean, next time you go back there, you can get it up again and you're more than halfway to sound check. It does sound brilliant to be able to do that. But is it the case that so much of this automated approach is perhaps phasing out the that human element of judging the room on a specific day as well as a specific place.
I guess it is, you know, and it is, and I have to say, we've just been recently testing a new system. We were looking at the 3D space and saying, okay, that box needs to point there and that one there, and so on. So being able to predict that is
You
is
can go
quite
so
handy.
far with that, and it is useful. And it's kind of,
Yeah, in a way, I mean, from a geometric point of view,
yeah.
it is.
But that it can't go much further than that. In terms
Not,
of
not really. And I mean, when you're outside, I mean, it's pretty intuitive. It's much, much easier. Much easier to know where to point things. I mean, I suppose I've done it. We've, you know, 40 years ago, you were having to, you know, use your brain and think about it. And the fact that it can be predicted reasonably well these days that's great. But you do wonder, you're steadily losing touch with what it is you're actually doing. And in the end, it is about getting good sound to the people. I mean, what other point is there to all this? And you might be able to define where it goes exactly, but it doesn't mean a lot if it's pretty awful quality. And I suppose I could take a stab at Liner as again, having praised them in one respect. I mean, get them outside and they just, the wind blows and it's all over. Sounds coming and going like a mad thing. I mean, audiences really don't like that. Nobody says a word about it. You know, this is, the Kool-Aid has been drunk. This is God. No matter what they do wrong, it's still acceptable. It's quite fantastic to me, actually, just how bad outdoor sound could be.
Is horn loaded any better though?
Yeah, I feel it is. It's got more go in it to start with. It's not a kind of languid collaboration between a bunch of disparate loudspeakers. It's something that really means what it says and it punches out. You know, when you're dealing with horn loaded, can be as good as 109, 110 dB for a watt or 1 meter. That's an awful lot of audio without much electricity, and they do tend to hold very steady in, shall we say, in bad weather. So yeah, I would say they do.
Because I've heard phase, you know, with point source, the wind blows, you hear the next cabinet next to it sort of phases in, whereas with a line array, horizontally at least, you don't get that phasing. I guess you do in the vertical plane, but you do with point source as well.
Well, sorry, but I have to disagree. I think it's worse with line array. What I've heard of. To be honest, I don't get out much, so. The gentleman there's got a question.
yes.
Do you think we'll be getting to a point soon where the manufacturers of the desks and equipment will be going like the guitar manufacturers who went to integrate circuits and then suddenly went back to putting valves in?
Or a revival of older circuitry.
And producing sort of analogue
Yeah.
units
But
to stick on your digital desk.
But you see, the drive there was artistic, was it not, from the musicians? You know, they were very concerned about the tonality of their instrument.
So the push needs to be from musicians and
Sound
sound
engineers,
engineers, doesn't it?
And
I think the industry is pushing to get the research money back and pushing digital. How soon before they stop saying, okay, we'll stop pushing digital and we'll try and mix analog and digital together?
who knows? I mean, our speaker systems, we try and actually get the loudspeakers correct. We don't use. I actually feel if I start using EQ, I've failed. You know, because when you put a whole dose of corrective EQ into your system, you're actually removing headroom, and I mean, you're stealing part of the playing field from the people who are going to use it. And you leave them with a little corner that they've got to try and get all the mix into, dynamically. And you didn't get that from me. There's people who've recently used things who are saying exactly this. Use one of our systems and then use the typical today's stuff, and it's quite shocked them how small the window of opportunity is that they've got to try and get everything to fit into. You know, what you want is a very large playing field that you can build up. You know, I mean, okay, if you're dealing with minimalist techno, which has got bugger all going on in it, apart from lots of bass and or something like an orchestra where you've got layers and layers, it just doesn't all get in there. If you bring anything forward, something else gets pushed back. I had lots of engineers say that to me. So how long will it be before? I don't know. I've got no idea. You at that point, you're in the realm of the human condition.
Is there anything you'd like to see changed in education and training of perhaps future generations of engineers that might make them more aware?
Yes, there is. I'd like to see younger people being taught how to use their ears, taught the difference between good and bad sound. If there's anybody actually around who can tell them that these days, and they've got the means to demonstrate it. But they're not being taught to listen, they're being taught to look at computers and play with photons. It's a nonsense, frankly. It's got nothing to do with audio engineering is a fascinating place to be because it's half science and half art. There is an art to it. Until our machinery and our computers are as good as what we've got up here, they're just tools, they're not the answer.
Okay. Nice. Any other questions that have arisen out of? Yes, please.
Is there, in your mind, a hierarchy? In other words, we keep not mentioning amplifiers, I've noticed. So, if you've got great loudspeakers and the wrong amplifiers, never mind the wrong mixer, which is again...
Yeah, okay, we've been leaving that part out.
Yes. And
well,
I'm not saying that you should intentionally make things wrong, but the signal degrades, it's moving in one direction from the microphone to the loudspeaker to the listener. So the earlier you've made it wrong, the less you can do, surely.
yes.
What's your thinking on amplifiers?
Well, yeah, I mean, typically amplifiers on paper distortion has always been way less than loudspeakers. You know, their decimal points moved one or two places.
You're not measuring transient.
They used to call it slew rate, actually. Again, how fast and how high can it jump when asked to? And that's to do with how good the power supply is and whether it's sitting there. And one of the great things about PWMs, apparently, is that they can, they've got infinite power, well, on paper. In other words, you're not restricted by how much capacitance you've got in the old school way of doing it with a toroidal transformer and a whole bunch of capacitors. We worked out in the 70s that if you had loads of capacitors, you were going to get, shall we say, more attack, impact, because things could jump. Most of the really good amplifiers still made in this country, it seems to me. It's strange, but they are. Again, I'm trying not to mention names. They do make a difference, of course they do. And it's really down to how well they're being auditioned and the quality of the human being that's doing it. Because even though it can all look good, you know, you get some nice figures. You know, there are still things that we don't exactly measure, but are to do with the way it comes over to us. So yeah, they are really important, but we like to think that that's something that's mostly sorted out. Of late, they have got a lot better. They've certainly got lighter, which is great.
But on the other hand, Tony, they're starting to introduce DSP, aren't they? You're starting to get like Brooklyn products where you've got control, loudspeaker management, for example, inside the amplifier. Is that going to compromise along the same lines as we've been discussing? Is the amplifier in danger of being
up until
sucked into this?
Yeah, absolutely it has.
Mire?
Yes, it has been. up until very recently, we've been absolutely staggered at how bad some of the DSPs converters are on some of these amps. You know, there's stuff from America that's just almost unusable. But recently, especially with using the Dante protocol, you can actually hold very good signal integrity. We've been pleasantly surprised of late by some. Well, I wasn't going to mention any names, but yes. Yeah, they've really done well.
Well, they've got, just so you know, they own the Lake signal processing legacy, which was invented in Australia by Bruce Jackson, and it's like putting a media matrix or something like that inside an amplifier. And I think the next generation of lab products will show this.
Well, that's why they bought the company, and it's been a very sensible move. We listened to the Lake processor probably about 4 or 5 years ago versus the XTA. And I don't know if there's much else to consider that's, I mean, there are some other manufacturers, of course, and some of them are really quite good, but they're the two that have been around for a long time, and to be frank, there's hardly any difference between them. But you know, one's got software that's like a fairground, and the other one's actually fairly professional.
Okay. So obviously training and education, that's critical.
Yes, I get back to the point. Above all, you need to understand the difference between good and bad sound.
Literally training students to listen, intuitively and critically, and understand these issues of transients and the way the system can get closer to the reality.
Absolutely, and I mean, to put a bit more on that, what I encourage students to do is what I do, and over the years there's certain tracks I've found that are well produced, are engaging. You know, I can get emotionally involved with the track, and I've learned it. And you know, and I'm checking things out after making sure there's no polarity mistakes, or you know, all the stuff you take for granted that you think should be right. 9 times out of 10 isn't anyway. So you check all that first, but then you put on your tune, and within about 4 seconds, you know if things are more or less on balance, or if somebody's got the high mids too loud. And high mid is getting to be quite a pain these days, because that's where most of the mixing seems to be. So I'm skipping from one thing to another here, but many times I've heard people put a test track on our stuff, which is way ahead of using a microphone. That's another thing to actually mention, but it sounds perfectly nice. And then they start pulling out all the low mid and start pushing all the high mid. And there is the Fletcher-Munson curve, which is sensitivity versus frequency, and it is roughly between 3 and 5K, or peaks at 4K. It's where all the consonants are. It's where all the attention grabbing stuff is. So, okay, you want to make sure your voice has got some of that, so it's intelligible. But if you try and put the guitars, the trumpets, everything into that band, then you've just got a bone fight. And I go to things and I think, well, it's like you've got a colour spectrum, and you're leaving out, say sound's colour, then bass is going to be red. Maybe you get a bit of orange, but not much. So orange is missing, yellow, green, and then all we're left with is blue and violet, and that's where the rest of the mix is. So my partner of 35 years, John Lucian, says, yeah, it's rather like banging the side of the camper van. You get a big boom out of the side of the camper van, and the cutlery drawers rattling. I mean, that's modern audio for you. And it's crazy, because actually in those orange and yellow frequencies is a lot of power, because they're just above bass. And if you want separation, if you want clarity, some instruments more lend themselves to being. I mean, only last week we had a guy doing exactly what I just described, And then he turns around and says, I can't get the guitars. Well, of course you haven't, because you just take all those frequencies away. I mean, you've got the top edge of it, but you know, the body of the thing is gone. Because, and this is what I mean by not necessarily corrupted or damaged hearing, but corrupted sense of hearing.
Yeah.
And it's rife, actually. In fact, it's the norm.
So is it possible that if that is addressed in terms of training and education, we might get engineers asking for a revival?
It would be great. I mean, chance would be a fine thing, as I say.
Well,
It's
given
not,
your strength of feeling on this and the recent moves in the wider industry towards providing training and experiences, how long will it be until we see the Tony Andrews Sound Academy for high quality sound recognition? Money where your mouth is, mate.
I mean, my main love is loudspeakers. When I feel like I've run out of juice in that area, then you know, maybe then I can start to regurgitate the experience in a meaningful way. And you know, because I think it's about setting up examples. You know, you need a really good reference point, and it's okay. This is what happens when you overload the front end of this. This is what happens when you. I mean, you know, we deal a lot with DJs.
Yeah.
Because the business has decided that's the only place we're fit for some reason, and they use a thing called tractor, which they play, and as it's delivered, it comes with. If you go into the preferences, there's an area in there which deals with the EQ, and which default is set to X zone. You actually need to change it to classic. And further down that list is auto limiting and auto gain. And just by switching those things off, the actual file playing is improved enormously. And this isn't me. This is actually Native Instruments wondering why, when I showed them that things weren't sounding that great, they came back 2 weeks later and said, this is what we found. So it's layers of processing. And the purest thing we found for PC, and I'm not that up with Macs, is foobar. And it's free, and it's got no bells and whistles, it just plays the file. And it makes a big difference. So this is before we've even got out of the laptop and into the sound card. There's already things to be done there. And so the lesson from this is, the more layers of processing that you use, the bigger the chance of degrading things, because none of them are perfect. And getting back to the thing about the mixers, you know, with all the bells and whistles on every channel, how many of those do you really need? And maybe it would be better to move the microphone, or put some carpet on the floor, or you know, half a dozen other things that are not to do with just sitting there pushing buttons, because that is not audio. It's understanding the space you're in and the problems you're going to get, and setting speakers in the right place. You can't push buttons on a console to put speakers in the right position. And it's true that if you've got a button, it's quite likely to get pushed anyway. So, you know what I mean? It's
good lesson in life, I think.
it's the medium becomes the message, as Marshall McLuhan said back in, and it surely has.
So when are we going to see people like you teaching people like me how things should sound? Because I'm only 30. I've never probably, it's CDs, it's MP3s, it's downloads, you know, next generation down, it's tinny iPhones. I can't teach people what sounds good if I don't know, or I can't mix things to sound good, is I imagine the premise, if I'm already too far gone into digital desks and line array ? So if you want people like me to start going, actually, do you know what, Tony, I think you're right. I think let's sack off line arrays, let's get back to analog desks. I don't really give a toss about the technology kind of side of it. I want things to sound amazing. I'm a classical musician, that's my background. I want a symphony orchestra without any chipping speakers, but obviously that doesn't happen.
Yeah, but there you have. Well, there's an example of something sounding natural and good, and you know, go for a walk in the woods, listen to the birds. I don't know. There are pure, real sounds around us.
People don't listen to them.
There are 7 billion voices on planet Earth, and we probably could recognise every single one of them given enough time. That's an amazing fact, but they're all different. So we're very tuned to human speech, of course we are.
Well, I hope that the next opportunity we all get to hear Tony's views on these matters, you'll take it, because it's been fantastic. If there are no further questions...
Just a quick one.
Please.
I've just read the other day that you've installed a new speaker range in a club in America. Could you quickly go into that at all?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the last bit of that.
Basically, I've just read that you've got a new product range that you've just installed in this certain club in America. Is there any chance you could go into that at all? Quickly.
What is new?
Well, I'll tell you about it. Yeah, we've taken another slight move forward, I would say. We were asked to do something a bit different. There was actually 3 clubs in America that all seemed to hit about the same time. One is Sound in Los Angeles, there's Marquee in Manhattan, and Output in Brooklyn. And we did variants of some new technology that we've been working on for a couple of years. And what drove it was the fact that because we've become so predominant in that particular market area, we're getting attacked. Of course, that's what happens. Actually, it can be quite ugly. What goes on, and we had to make a move to hold on to our position. So we pushed things forward a bit and came up with some new stuff. The thing I'm actually quite proud of is the 15-inch horn-loaded stuff we've done. It's a graveyard area. The frequencies between, say, 90 and 300, 400 are typically, I mean, if you look at any sound engineer's graphic, they're fairly well pulled out because it's the frequencies of this sort of thing and everything that's around us, and they're usually well out of control. And to be honest, I never thought I think we'd done a reasonable job of it, but I could see that, you know, there was lots of room for improvement. And I was just lucky enough to find a real drum with a skin on a recording that actually allowed me to see, if you like, into the clarity of that. When I knew it was a drum skin, I knew I got the thing tuned right. When it wasn't, when it was just that frequency rather than a thing, and we've done really well there. The efficiency is phenomenal. It's an area that you never expected to be able to use the word transparent on, but you know, it's getting towards that. So there's something about it for me and how I feel about it, I guess.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for...
I'm not trying to stop, by the way.
No, I mean, I've got a train to catch, of course. If anyone else has got any more questions...
Can I just mention to
Please,
Mr. Chairman here, I've been quite heavily involved in education the last few years, and I just called Functional up and said, can I bring my students to come and talk to you about audio and listen to good stuff? And I've been taking my students there for 4 years, so pick up the phone. Don't have to wait for the academy.
Well, this is now the first session of the Tony Andrews Academy of Listening, as well as the final session. PLASA Focus King. Have we launched it? There will be.
No, I'm always happy to talk about it, as you can tell. It is a bit OCD with me, I have to admit, but there we are.
So, do you consider using rhythm drivers?
Yes. Yeah, they're very nice, in fact. And somebody showed me some a couple of years, about a year ago, that were absolutely phenomenal. Efficiency is quite low, and I thought, well, you know, if I can get a moment, I'd be interested to see if we could horn load one of these. And get the efficiency up and directivity a bit more control. So yeah, there's some really good ones out there. I think these were coming from not Slovakia. They were coming from what used to be Yugoslavia, Serbia. There's all sorts of nutcases everywhere.
Well, there used to be a lot of cheap, very, very clever audio technology from the other side of the world. It's not so cheap anymore. I mean, you know why that is. They're joining the EU. Any more? Okay, well, thanks very much. Please give your
Yeah, thank you.
appreciation.